Good evening. I'd like to call this school board special work session regarding the superintendent search to order. And the purpose of the school board work session tonight is to select the next superintendent of Osseo area schools. And with that, I would like to start with introductions beginning to my left.
School board member Jessica Craig.
Dean Henke, school board member.
Heather Douglas, school board member.
Ken Dragseth, President, School Exec Connect.
Jim Bauk, interim superintendent.
Laurel Anderson, Executive Director of Human Resources.
Barb Olson, Director of Community Relations.
Jim Brigette, school board member.
Jackie Mosqueda Jones, school board member.
Mike Ostafi, school board member. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Bauk.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Tonight, what we're going to do is, in essence, backtrack. Welcome, Tanya. You can come up to the table. We're going to backtrack through what we walked through last week regarding the search process. Talk a little bit about that, the superintendent profile, and then Laurel will go through some contract provisions that we're just making a proposal about. We don't have to have a agreement tonight, but some things that you asked us to pull together. And so with that in mind, and it's Ken and I had a chance to meet last week after our work session so that we could walk through the search process, what we had talked about at the board table, and the profile. So I'm hoping that we can probably get through those two pieces with some speed this evening. So with that said, in your packet you should have a fresh copy of the search proposal, and it hasn't changed from last week when we met. Same pieces are in there, the same components that you agreed to as a board to go forward with. I had a chance to review this with Ken, as I said a few minutes ago. We'll just ask him to make some comments from the search firm perspective, and then we'll go from there. So.
Okay, well, thank you. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm excited to be working with Osseo. Obviously, I've worked with Osseo many years when I was in Edina and elsewhere. The main goal, obviously, for our search process is to find you an outstanding superintendent. That's the whole goal, and we say we're going to bring you some candidates, but we have to find one you like and one that you want. Okay, and that will do a great job. Our goal as a company is to find somebody that will be here and stay a while and do an outstanding job. And I think I looked at, just our company, we talk about a 96% success rate. What we mean by that is that 96% of the superintendents we placed, over 350 searches, are been offered a second contract. That's, we think, in terms of obviously they've done a good enough job. They've offered, sometimes, situations happen that a family or whatever happens, but most of them have gone in there, and most of them, and if you look around the metropolitan area, the ones that we've done a lot of them, they're still in their jobs and doing good work. So that's what our goal is, to find that next one for you. As Jim and I talked about, we did go over this in great detail, and I thought it was a good plan you've put together. I like the idea, I think, of the kind of the three-step process that you're talking about, and involving some of you in the initial screening. That won't be a problem. And narrow it down so that we end up in, the first round interview for you will probably be more just your own, but we are always involved in all our searches. That final interview, and I think you've done that before, you bring in for an all-day process, you get feedback from all the different groups. We want you to have as much information as possible when you're done making that final decision from all the different groups. Understanding, we always say to all the groups, you're for input, the board has to make the decision, obviously. So that will work fine. I think the only concern I have, and Jim and I talked a little bit about this, it might be a kind of a tight schedule in terms of time frame, and so my recommendation would be if we just move it 1 week. What we have, obviously, we've got like 2 or 3 weeks for winter break, then people are off doing whatever, and then you come back, and if they only have 2 weeks, I don't want to turn off anybody to say I can't get it done in time. And I'd rather, if it doesn't, we'll still finish, by the kind of toward the middle of end of February, and still get ahead of the game. And I know there are other searches that are going to be happening in the Twin Cities, but we'll be ahead of that process, so.
I think when I looked at the calendar, if we did the vacancy closing on February 1st, if you knock out the winter break of 2 weeks, it still gives us then a total of about 6 weeks of having the position posted and out. So it'll be a couple weeks in advance of the winter break. We'll have the break for 2 weeks, and then it will be, I think it's 3.5 weeks afterwards. So I kind of recalibrated the timeline. It's still, as Ken alluded to, allows us to finish up and hopefully offer the position to somebody the week of, would be the Monday is the 18th, I think, of February.
18th.
That's President's Day. You would do your last interviewing that week, that full day process, and have an evening where you would then determine if you want to extend an offer to one of those 2 or 3, whatever number of candidates you have as finalists, and then turn around and begin negotiating a contract. And we do have a work session on March 5th already scheduled. We could add a special meeting, providing we had the contract agreed upon, and we could take 5-10 minutes to have a special meeting that night, approve the contract, and make sure the person signed, sealed, and delivered then. So my original goal, as I expressed to you at the beginning of November, was to have the process wrapped up by February. And it will really just depend on how long it takes to negotiate a contract. If we can, even add in the week, I think we'll be okay, from my perspective, so. Any questions to Ken about the selection process, or what we've talked through, or he's comfortable with it? If you're still comfortable with it, then we'll start moving forward, because we have a meeting scheduled tomorrow after this.
Jim and I will meet tomorrow, we'll put all
To
the,
in fact finalize everything. So I just want to make sure that these are okay steps.
So in phase 1, recruitment completed and vacancy closed on or before January 25th. That's what we're moving to February 1?
right.
Correct.
That's correct.
Okay. And
And
then
your phase
screening.
two, would be the week of
push each
February
one a
4th
week.
then.
Okay,
Just
so
move
that
each
would
one
all
a
be
week.
pushed.
And
farther.
phase 3 would be the week of February 11th. And phase 4 would be the week of February 19th. And then you would, the phase 5 was the same week, because you'd see the candidates all that same week and make a determination. And then you'd authorize the board chair and vice chair to negotiate contract.
Okay. So on the, I think it said, yeah, it was only 2 weeks after they come back from break, but really it's 3 weeks. We come
It's
back
3 weeks
January
now.
It's
3rd.
3 weeks.
Right, we're extending that out because a lot of.
Yep.
Now it's 4.
Now it's 4.
Okay.
It was 3.
3 was
Now it's
gonna be
4.
too
It's
short.
2,
In
it's
terms
2
of-
before
yeah.
the break,
Right.
4 afterwards.
What is helpful for us, and I'm sure other search firms too, they have a timeline where they have to have everything in, but we've got to flush through and talk to a lot of people and see that. So we need that week in there to finalize your group that we'll bring to you to screen again. So it'll be there's 2 screening process. One, obviously, that we're going to go through to say, these people we think match your profile, and then you can narrow that down to who you think you want to bring into the second round.
Can some of that be done concurrently, maybe in the last 2
Yes.
weeks?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. No,
And that's
yeah.
what's proposed in here.
Right, yep.
So we have to wait and see what kind of flow of applications we get, Mike.
Okay.
There are people who wait to the last second. We talked about that last time around the table, that will wait till the very last day to apply. There are others that will have everything submitted, well in advance. And then we'll have to, so that advisory team, which will have 3 board members on it, we're going to have some, for lack of better terms, nimbleness to your schedule a little bit, or flexibility to your schedule, because we might be able to arrange 2 or 3 people to come in on a given day, and then might be 2 or 3 days later before that next cadre of people we can, bring through that process. That's what you have to be prepared for. Then the other phases are all scheduled into days and set times, and away we go.
Yep.
So, yes, we can do it while it's open too.
Okay. No, I just want to use the time wisely, and if we are going to extend it by a week, at least up front, I just want to make sure we're still sticking to to the schedule.
Yep.
Because that was our
Yes.
biggest issue last time.
Yes.
Yep, absolutely.
Yes.
Will we
Okay.
still have, does that leave enough room for onboarding? I mean, it's going to cut into that a little bit. That shouldn't be a big
I
deal.
think we'll be okay.
Okay.
Yep.
Right.
I'm confident it will be okay.
Okay.
Any other questions for Ken or myself about the selection of process? If not,
Oh, one other question. You're talking about when they apply. What sort of package do they have to create? You know,
Yeah,
like
that's
they're
a
talking about a
good
right
question.
sample or, you know, they've got to develop some artifacts for review, right?
A couple of things, from when they apply on our site, we have about, it goes roughly a 7 to 10 page application form that has all the information about that. They have questions that they have to respond to. They have to talk about, you know, a variety of different things in terms of references and all of their background. So you'll have a good sense of who they are from that. You'll get a cover letter from them. You'll get a set of all their graduate transcripts from wherever. You'll get a set of their license, and you'll get any reference letters that they submit, okay? And what we always like to say is that the reference letters are what they give us. Our other references is who we talk to in addition to that. And then we're not, we go, the reason I think that a lot of times these are good matches, that we vet them. We haven't had surprises. We haven't had, in all the searches I've done in probably 50 in Minnesota, we've never been surprised by something that come up later and said, gee, didn't you know about so-and-so did this back in, 10 years ago? And part of that is because you just talk to a lot of people and you get a good sense of who they are and what's going on. And obviously, media, you can Google everything. Everybody does anyway. As soon as a name comes out, everybody will Google them anyway. So, so you got to be. We just want to bring you as much information as you can get. You can do a writing sample when they, ones that you choose to move forward, and they'll analyze that within your own system. And any other thing that you'd want, we can make that work in the process too.
I would assume that might include things like a criminal background check.
We do, yes. If you're going to do a thorough criminal background check, which is you do that, I know internally, you can do that. That's going to be, that needs to be done either internally because it's going to cost so much and you have access to whoever you want to do it. We do criminal background checks in our company, and we do it for a lot of districts. And we usually say do that on the 3 finalists if you're going to do that, because it costs about $750, and they do an extent, you'll get a complete report from every darn thing from, parking tickets to credit ratings and whatever. But yeah, it's all there, and you can make that decision, or you can do that. A lot of districts do that themselves, save that money, but it's important, absolutely.
Does that include like a PACER search, legal involvement
yeah,
that
any
you may
kind.
have had, whether charged or not, to help inform?
Anything that's public documents and any legal kind of thing, it would be included in that.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know, what does our district one do?
A lot less than that.
Okay, so we can determine we can put you in, we do use Baker Eubanks as a huge international firm that does this. And they, if you want that, we just submit, we have to get the approval of the candidate to do that, and they sign off a release, and you go ahead and do that. And, we've just finished a couple of searches where we did that, and we did it on the finalists, and the board had that information prior to making a final decision. So if we do that, we just need to schedule that so they get in and get it done, and you get the results back. That's the key thing.
Do we do a credit check? Or I would like us to, if we don't do it, consider a credit check.
So I heard that's part of
Yeah.
Ken's process. It is
Yeah,
not
well,
part of the
Yeah,
district.
the part of
Yeah, so I
Baker
was
Eubanks is a
wondering
credit
which-
check. Yep, right.
Yeah, we do not.
Okay.
Ours costs about $47 compared
As
to
I said,
$700. So
it's it's obviously a more extensive process.
Well, one thing that disappointed me about the last round is we did pay for the extra in-depth checks, and we had a last-minute surprise on a candidate, so I'm afraid of that happening again, but it sounds like it'll be different maybe this time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I don't know what your surprise was,
No, I
so
don't either,
I can't
I
address it.
don't know if it was ever substantiated, but there was a
Okay.
last-minute surprise. But we had spent the extra money as a district, and it was unfortunate. but-
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, my only comment would be, I suppose nothing is foolproof, so, I mean, you can't guarantee it, but
We have,
think-
well, this company anyway, we've been with them for 10 years. We've never had anybody come back and said they missed something that they needed to know.
Okay.
But they're held accountable for that, obviously. They're paying for it.
What kind of marketing kind of do you do to get candidates?
Yep. We're gonna, again, we'll talk a little, we're gonna meet tomorrow, we'll go through all this, but on the advertising that we do, obviously, we do our own website, we do MASA, which is the typical one in Minnesota that everybody looks at. You can go with Education Week, which is a national magazine. It costs about, I'm gonna do now, they'll give you a sheet. I got some sheets on that, and probably easier to just look at that.
We may already be late for the January issue, wouldn't we be? For closing?
Yeah. Here. Well, I guess I don't, I did. Let me just go over what I do know. You have, the Education Week is about $495 for 4 weeks online. ASA, the National Association of School Administrators, is about $409 online. We went and looked at, I think last time you did the National Association of Black School Educators. I looked up the numbers on that, and that's what maybe it's there too. There it is. Thank you, Jim. All right, hey, hidden under there. I'll send those around.
thanks.
Take a look at some of those. We got enough there, not enough. I think the goal is obviously to get it out in a national perspective. You did National Association of Black School Educators. I looked up what that is. That's a 30-day online, is $250, pretty cheap. If that's what their website says, so we assume that's right. And then the Association of Latino Administrators and Superintendents, again, that's a posting to all their members, and they said that was $150. And then the American Association of School Personnel Association, I don't know what that cost is, or I didn't find that, but that's another one you did last time. And we looked at monster.com, and it's like it's like $3,200 you want to do a big thing, but if you just do a blast, supposedly to all the people who in that, supposedly it's like $319, anybody who's part of their system. So those are the main ones, and people who are looking for jobs, superintendent's positions, will look at one of these. I mean, they're well-known national connections. If they don't know about, excuse me, cough. If they don't know about any of these, that was disconcerting to me, put it that way.
What about like LinkedIn or?
Pardon?
What about LinkedIn?
Yeah, you can do that too, you know. Yeah, no, there's all kinds of, maybe a couple other ones, I was trying to remember what their names were, but there are.
And we'll share it on our own social media too.
Yeah, right, yeah, no. The word's gonna get out on, you're a highly recognizable district, you're well-known in the state. I mean, it's not like we're talking a little district where people, who are you, And we always say too that if it's important, if people apply from outside Minnesota, and we have a lot of them who typically do, our first reaction is, okay, what do you know about us? Why do you want to come here? you know, are you looking for a job? Are you looking for, or do you understand what we're about here? Do you understand? And the reason I say that, we've had in Minnesota a number of superintendents who come and left, and they get here and, gee, you know, the spouse doesn't like the weather, or they don't like the weather, and, you know, they're not quite the culture, and they didn't think the winters were that long, and whatever. And so what we don't want, you know, you got to know what you're getting into. If you're moving to Minnesota, just like if I were going to move to California, I should know what that's about, you know. And so we love to have them come. A lot of them, it's amazing how many people out there say, well, I grew up here, I went to college here, I have spouses here, my kids moved here for work or whatever, and boy, you get them hooked, you know, and that's great.
I feel like I remember hearing last time that statistically, when they don't have a reason to be here like that, they don't stick around very long.
That's what we found. We have found in our searches that we've done, and we've come into districts where, probably not searches we've done, but where districts we've come in after the people have left, and, yeah, well, here was 3 years, for 3 years, and, you know, whatever, or she was here and it just didn't work out, they didn't like the culture, they didn't like the community in terms of weather and things to do. Not that they can't change, but we just want to make sure that you know what you're getting into, okay? This is Minnesota. They're coming from the south, that's going to be different.
Well, and we want them to make sure they want to come to Osseo.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's not just a
Lots of
job,
places to
you know,
go.
this is a passion for being here.
I was wondering, do you intentionally, like, blast out communications to, like, all the assistant soups in the metro area, or do you just wait for them to come to you?
You know, typically we do not, because you know, Jim and I have been around a long time, but I've been in this state a long, I know most, you know, a lot of ours is just recruiting, you know. We know people in different situations who we think would, you know, potentially match up here, you know. Doesn't mean that they'll apply, but, anybody who's interested in doing this will seek out this job, okay? I'm not, you know, we'll go after the good ones, and we already talked about who we want to go after, you know, and, but if you are, you know, if you're really interested in being a superintendent in Osseo, you're going to, either someone's going to tell me to give you a call, and I'll call them, or they will call us, and we'll go from there. And,
I don't think we, you know, Ken talked about, the thing we have to remember is people know that there is a vacancy here.
yeah, right.
And they've known for a long period of time.
Yeah, right. Just-
And so the other side of the equation for me is, you know, again, we want someone who wants to come here because of this district, this school community, and what we're trying to achieve through our work. And we'll go out and recruit, you know, people. But at the same time, it's not unknown. I go to a meeting and people have asked me, well, when you're going to kick off your process? I think I shared with you, I had a superintendent talk to me a few weeks ago saying he knew of a couple assistant superintendents that might be interested in the position that he's had the opportunity to work with over the years. So when are you kicking off this process so that I can talk to them and then they can talk to you, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not, I mean, in our metro area here, Jim, it's well known that, you know, and I've just been telling people we're going to try to have the position posted by December, and we hope to have someone hired by the end of February. And after tonight, I can go out there and really start actively, you know, going forward, or after our meeting tomorrow. And so I'm not worried about assistant superintendents in the area not knowing about it. I've already had a conversation with a couple that have called me. So, yeah, people are just waiting for us to get going right now. So,
Thank you.
yeah, at least that's been my feeling so far, and what I've had come to my direction, so.
Are we approving advertising costs tonight?
Whenever you want to, I guess. I don't know what
Okay.
the process.
And probably soon, because don't we want to
We want to get it
We
out.
wanna get it out.
Right away, so
Okay.
this week, so.
So are there other places that you would like us to advertise this besides what's listed there? And we're looking at going out there for about 6 weeks, 7, 8 weeks here. Are you going to include the 2 weeks over our winter break?
And Monster would seem not to hit our demographic. LinkedIn more, would more than anything else. You're looking at professionals. And the 4 that are listed are probably fine. The bottom 2 probably covered by the top 2, but if we want to show that we're looking in many aspects,
Yeah,
it
that's
doesn't
up to
cost
you.
a lot.
I don't- yeah,
So,
right.
And you might have mentioned MSBA, but I'm not seeing it on the
Oh,
list.
yeah, yes, what we notify, yes, right. We notify MSBA, they do not have a, like a job site like MASA does, but yes, yes. I send it in to MSBA, I should have had that on there.
And what MSBA does with that, for the other board members, is they turn around, then they just send out an email to area superintendents. They might send it out to board members, I'm not sure, but I have received 2 of them this week already. Reminder notice, War Road, Minnesota has an opening, the deadline is such and such, please contact so-and-so. And any job that they're doing a search for, they will list on the MASA site. And I think it's Sandy, Gunlock, that does their searches for them, so.
I also belong to an organization for state negotiators, and we do the similar thing, so I have communication that I can give to our person to do a blast out. The other part of our proposal is that I spoke to Dante Williams, our recruitment and retention manager, to get his opinion about are there other places. And he said Monster.com and Indeed, what he recommended, if we were to use them, would be the large search, which is about $10,000. He did the research, and he said, if you're going to use them to the full functionality, here's what it would be, $10,000. And that's when Jim and I said, probably not. Let's go these first. But that was the only other search idea that Dante brought forward other than what we've already identified from last year and this year.
So would you recommend Indeed then?
For $10,000?
Well,
I
no,
don't
do
think
they have
so.
a smaller?
Do they have a smaller thing like Monster does?
You could put an article in.
Yeah, I think you could probably do a blast for a small. The part of the nuance to Indeed, and I found this when we were filling Patricia Magnuson's job, is that people link into that and think they're applying for a job, and they're not really applying to us or to the search firm. And so then it doesn't give them a notification. It says you've applied or you're interested in this job, but then it doesn't link it to our position exactly. So unless you're doing this full 10,000, you sometimes mislead people thinking that they've done an application process when it's really staying with that Indeed process.
Interesting.
And then they do keyword searches and whatnot. So I'd be hesitant unless there's a blast that's a lot less expensive that would give us just exposure.
in these level of jobs, this level of job is not going to be interested in by the people on those boards, for the most part. Those people interested aren't going to be on those boards.
Right.
So,
And then, we'll obviously put a link on your website, so anybody going to, because people look at the website, and you just have a link to where they can go to our application process and start that.
The other part of the Osseo Sun Post included some advertisement at the marquee, on the Osseo marquee, so there must be some digital advertising.
That was all about the community engagement sessions. So that
Not
was
about
not about the
advertising.
position.
Any other thoughts on the marketing piece or questions that you have?
I see we have the Osseo Sun Post, which is,
this week,
That's
We-
what Barb was just talking about.
Actually,
no, I
can I
think
see
that's
the
something
list? Or you-
different.
I just had a question. It was what you did last time, and I didn't know
We
what
did
you did.
not, I'm confident we did not post the position in the
Okay.
Osseo.
I was gonna say, I don't think
Press or
that we
the-
did, because it's a really tiny readership.
Yeah,
I
I'm-
feel like that wouldn't
yeah.
be
I'm
necessarily
confident we
a,
did not. We did take out paid advertising on that electronic sign, but only for the purpose of promoting the community
Okay.
meetings.
Right.
Okay.
Makes sense.
Well, I would approve the list as is.
Mhm.
I don't know.
Any other thoughts on that, Jessica? I mean, the rest of the board members and soon-to-be board members? We're just looking for some guidance here so we
no,
can
I
launch.
mean, yeah.
You don't
let's
need
do
to
it.
adopt it, I mean,
We'll
in the
get
formal
tomorrow,
motion.
we'll get tomorrow, and we'll get the action, we'll get the, we'll put what we need to do
Yeah.
and put together and get it going. We want to get it going, obviously, this week,
Yeah.
be our goal.
I think it's good.
Dean,
Yep, I'm fine.
Mike,
Yep.
Jackie?
Yeah.
Jim?
Yep.
Kelsey? Tanya?
A little skeptical of the monster.com, but, yes.
Okay.
We'll check and see if they're realistic on that.
Yeah.
They advertise it, but I want to know exactly what are you giving us for that, you know?
Right, if it's not one that you typically use or
No.
source candidates from,
No.
then I don't know the lifetime value there.
Yeah. no.
Yeah, if you haven't used it in your 350
We have not,
searches.
we have not used monster.com and any other searches. I know that that has been suggested by some people, and
I would be worried that candidates wouldn't even look at Monster.
I don't think they will. I don't think people looking for this position, I don't think will do it. I've never
Yeah.
heard that, but,
I would just be interested to see what it would cost for LinkedIn.
yeah.
I do.
Well, we'll find out what they say, That'll be worth, easy call.
Okay. We got good direction, and that's what we needed tonight. So we just didn't come back and wait till the 11th or the 18th and then lose some advertising marketing time out there, so.
I was
And
going to
Barb?
actually ask one thing. A lot of these
Okay.
say 4 weeks or 30 days, but we're planning
You
on
can do.
having it open for 6 weeks, so would we
Yeah.
do like a
Yeah,
partial?
Yes, if you go to 495, for example, I think it's 695 for 6 weeks. I mean, they all
Okay.
extend out.
Okay.
So we'll work with them.
Yeah.
If
Because
you
I wouldn't
wanna do
want
it
to
6
stop
week- yeah,
advertising
right.
No.
when it's
no.
still
So
open.
we'll do a
Correct.
6-week process.
Okay.
Correct. Correct. Okay. So enough on the process, and we will adjust the timeline a little bit, and we'll get all this back out to you in a written format so that you have it. The other piece I wanted to go through with, for sure with Ken at the table, last week, we adopted the profile, and I had Barb lift it off of all that, because she's working on now the new invitation brochure, and we'll talk about that tomorrow when we meet with Ken. But I just had her lift the profiles, just to give you a quick scan of it. I know Ken's had 3 or 4 days to look at it, and you can comment on it, but we're ready to roll, and we'll take last year's invitation brochure, update it. It's got some other facts and figures to it. It was a nice high gloss piece, accentuating good things about our district and whatever, and we'll start pulling that together. Barb had hoped to have it for tonight, but we just didn't have time to pull it all together for a draft. But we will do, for those of you who were on the board last year, you know what I'm talking about. It's like about a 2 or 3, or it's a 4-page kind of handout, and it has the profile in it. It has all sorts of information about our district. And we'll bring that back to you, so you can see it, but then the search firm will start using that, and we will use it on the district's behalf too. But any other comments about the profile right now that, otherwise we'll go forward using this.
Yeah, because what we do, we will match the candidate background and skills and so on to these documents. And they look good. I went, there's.
Nothing seems glaringly missing.
No, and I look for the things that I would expect out of Osseo, and they seem to be there, I'm always, you've got, academics, the whole idea of accountability and a person working as work well with people and putting students first, all of those are in there. And again, a spokesperson for the district, I think is important because that person is, and sometimes they don't say that. Yeah, and then you got goal setting. I didn't see any area that was largely missing out of that, so I think you're fine.
Okay.
Good, thanks.
Good.
Ken, I had a question last time. And I know this was done. I had an interest in the candidate having a familiarity with multiple high school districts. And my rationale was it's easy to rally around one high school in maybe 1 or 2 communities. We have 3 spread across 8 communities. Any value in putting that on there?
It would be a limiting factor, and I think you might not want to do that. Doesn't mean, I understand totally, because it was much easier when I was in Edina to have 1 high school instead of 2, and you got 3. So, it is a complicating factor. I think what I would I wouldn't want to turn down a really good superintendent because they'd won high school, or a really good assistant sup because they were in one high school. And they may see that and figure that that's a limiting factor and not even apply. But I understand exactly what you're saying. It's different.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? I put this piece in your packet just to put it in there, just as some nice kind reminders. This is taken out of the MSBA handbook on hiring a superintendent. And it's just, things that you have to remember. I mean, I stated this at the beginning in November. You are the group that's empowered to hire this person, and only you. The length of the contract can't exceed 3 years. There's just some real things pulled right out of statute in here, just to be, again, kind reminders for you as we walk through this process. We're going to talk very publicly about what the contract might be. Well, the contract is a public document. And so I just put that in there for your own information, that's all. Nothing that we have to talk
Is there
about.
background on why it's 3 years? Is that so that the next board has some input?
Well, you can talk about it, but it was passed legislatively.
They used to have rolling things
Yep.
or way back when, and the legislature decided that 3 was good. What we find all over the country is that it just varies. Actually, a lot of states have what we call rolling contracts. So if you're in Wisconsin, for example, you can have a 2-year contract, and then every year it just rolls over if they like keeping them. I don't know if that's good or bad. Minnesota decides after 3 years you can have 1 to 3. I mean, it doesn't have to be 3, 1 to 3. And then you can decide a year ahead of time whether you're going to renew that contract or extend the contract and so on. And it works, I think it's
Yeah.
reasonable.
Yeah, it was just a legislative act.
Yep, yeah.
They
it's
just decided that they were going to limit contract length.
Yep.
You have some states that have 5 years,
Yeah,
and
right.
I think the one that was really common in Minnesota was about a 3 or 4 year contract with a rollover that, and I think, it was a political issue
Yeah.
back in the early 90s. And it has stuck since then, so,
Doesn't seem like that means local control, does it?
No, no, it doesn't. You have, they give you 1 to 3. That's their local control, is what they say.
I'm just
That's called the-
curious what legislative background.
Yeah, I don't,
that
I'm
came
sure
from.
they didn't have any background. There's some reason that someone decided to do that, and I don't know the politics behind
I
it.
use the statement defined autonomy.
There you go. Right.
So that's where that goes. The last thing we had on the agenda for tonight is the actual contract. And Laurel's going to walk through that. It's in your packet. We'll go page by page. And I just think the further we can get down this road, we don't have to decide it tonight if you feel uncomfortable with components. But the further we get down this road, the better we will be in a position to consummate a contract when we get into February. So, and with that said, I'm going to turn the floor over to Laurel, and she'll kind of walk through it, and I'll make some comments along the way. Ken might make some comments too. He has not seen this, so he's reading it for the first time also.
Thank you, Jim. Jim and I met and we reviewed MSBA model contract along with previous contracts that we in Osseo have had. And so I apologize for the small font, but so you can see the comments, that's the way it's going to line up. As we went through, I made blanks for areas that we need to fill in the details. The first piece that we need to talk about is the subsequent contract clause, and it goes to what Ken was just talking about. The MSBA is recommending removing these from contracts, and they recognize that it has been a past practice to have a subsequent contract clause in these contracts, and it becomes a little bit problematic, in talking with Jim. The superintendent then has to notify the board by a certain amount of time, and then there's all these notifications. MSBA says you should remove that, so that the whole subsequent contract clause.
So we just want you to know that's an
So
option.
1 through 6
B,
of B.
1 through 6.
Letter B, yep.
Okay.
Now, when Jim and I talked about it, so we were trying to think about what are the implications? What things could prohibit somebody from wanting to enter into a contract or have a pause? So one of the thoughts is, if you remove a subsequent contract clause, would that give somebody pause to say, then it's only a 3-year for sure, and we have to renegotiate? And even with the subsequent contract clause in there, it's still a 3-year contract, and we don't have to enter into another one. It just might allow somebody to say they're thinking about it beyond a 3-year contract. So part of it was MSBA saying, you shouldn't have it, you don't need it, and we believe it was in there for probably a certain reason, to give that person reassurance that we would be considering entering into another contract. It wouldn't be a 3-year and we're done, that there's a conversation that happens. But again, part of it is there's a nuance with the timeline and notification, and so it becomes a little bit more problematic in terms of if somebody's not paying attention, the superintendent has to notify the school board on a timely manner, and so it could become a problem. Our recommendation is we remove it.
Yeah, I can remember when language like this came into vogue. As superintendents, we no longer were governed by tenure, and that happened in the early 90s. And I think what superintendents were after at that time is at least let me know. Don't keep me hanging, school board. And now it's April,
Right.
May,
Yes.
and now in June you come to me and just say, I'm sorry, Jim, we're not going to renew your contract. And we've hired, Dean to be our interim, and we're going to do a search next year. That's what I think superintendents were looking for. This used to be, and I think one of the early model contracts that the MASA and MSBA had agreed to. And again, Laurel and I are saying, I think you can remove it. I think any good common sense person's going to know within a year or two whether you're going to do an annual evaluation of the person. It's in the contract. It's in our district policy that we annually evaluate administrators. So I think there's protection there. The one protection MSBA put out there instead of this is that the board would do an evaluation with 6 to 9 months to go, which would be then the indicator to me as a superintendent. I'm on year 3, you're doing my evaluation, it's January, and you're telling me I'm not doing a very good job, or I can see that there's a problem, there's a rift developing. I need to look elsewhere. I need to sharpen up my resume and probably start moving on. But I don't know if any of our candidates would come and say, I need this language in here. You have had it as a district for a long time, whether you want it in there or not, and it doesn't preclude you from still ending a contract in 3 years. So that's just a kind of a quick little nuance history of that language and why it came about.
Part of, sorry.
So quick clarification,
Could you pull Tanya's mic over a little bit? Thank
so
you.
the previous work, did you have a proposed contract already created, but we're going back to the blank slate of a template right now?
No,
Foundation?
the foundation is the last contract that we had prior to interim contract.
Okay, so then that's what this is.
Yes.
Correct.
So we're doing this ahead of time rather than doing it when we went to negotiate.
Yes.
So we're going to have most of the negotiating points,
You'll have your position solidified, and then it's a matter of negotiating with the
So
candidate.
part of this subsequent contract group here, it talks about the superintendent notifying us if they no longer want to be the superintendent. Is that also somewhere, what if we are in a situation where somebody's doing a great job, we want them to stay, and they don't want to, and then we don't find out until, really late? Is there a spot in here
That's the
that
flip side.
That's the flip side of it.
requires them to say, hey,
No.
if you're going to leave?
No.
that's also not a professional way of doing business either.
Yeah, I think they would
No.
be not helping themselves long-term, particularly if they stayed in the state of Minnesota. May not hurt them if they plan to go to, New York or Nebraska or someplace else in their future, but if they stayed locally, that would not be beneficial for them professionally. I don't know. You were going to say something?
Yeah, well, what we run into in a lot of the searches, that the superintendent has been applying for other jobs, and in March or April, he gets a job or she gets a job. And the board chair may know about it, or the board may know about it. I mean, that the person is notified that I am applying for this job because they're probably going to get reference calls, But the public typically doesn't always know that. And then the person is gone, and now the board is scrambling, what do we do? So then they end up either doing a rush search, or they end up with, okay, now we got an interim and we got to put things on hold a little bit and then wait a year before we do it. So I think I agree. I think it was put in there. It can benefit both. That's what I'm saying. There's, it's, if you want to leave, then you better let somebody know. Then it gives you an opportunity to decide early in the game to find a replacement.
I'm in favor of keeping the language. I think it clearly defines what needs to take place, but I obviously yield to the majority of the board.
I don't like all the prescription.
No?
This days, these many days, this date,
Got
this
to be
date.
something simpler.
There is something more simple from MSBA. It says, unless a subsequent contract is entered in accordance with, and it lists the statute. And then it also provides for the performance evaluation, the 6 to 9 months prior to the expiration of the contract, so we would want to add that in. It's not prescriptive, though, so it doesn't allow what Heather's talking about and what Jessica's talking about in terms of notifying the board in a timely manner if they're not interested in continuing a contract.
Because my fear would be that if we remove this entirely and we aren't notified in a timely manner, even if somebody's applying for other jobs, if we don't know that they're applying for other jobs and they don't notify us until right before their name becomes public, which could be in the spring, we're never going to have enough time, or the current board at the time will never, there's just no way to execute a search that quickly and hire somebody by July 1 if you don't find out till March or April.
That's when you hire the interim and then get ready for doing it in November of the following year. So you have an interim.
That's not really ideal.
Oh, it's not ideal, but that's what happens all the time, because in this period of time, in March and April,
Yeah.
you get a lot of people moving. So,
It just provides a little bit of cushion for both the superintendent and the district.
Right, to
I-
both know what's coming.
I liked some of the language that you were proposing, 6 or 9 months. I mean, it's not as prescriptive,
Yeah, I would.
but I don't like all of these.
Well-
I mean, personally, I don't like all the terms in there that, all
Well,
of that.
that's D, so we're just talking about that.
So the 6 to 9 months
No, we're talking about
is
all of
about a
this.
performance evaluation.
Right.
So we would want to add that. It's not in lieu of. So MSBA talks about, they list the statute and then talks about adding some language related to evaluation 6 to 9 months prior to the expiration of the contract. So it does not get to the dates and the notification of the continuance, of intending to continue in a position that I'm hearing interest in.
What
Yeah,
about the rest of the board members?
I was
How do
gonna
you
say,
feel about the language piece?
Typically, we've done an annual evaluation and presented it in December, which would be 6 months prior to the end of the contract. So if we continue doing the annual evaluation, we wouldn't necessarily have to spell that out in here.
Ken, what are you currently seeing in contracts? Are you seeing this language in contracts currently, and is it of value to
Well,
recruits?
It's been in the MSBA contracts in Minnesota. A lot of them, they just copy it and it's in there. I mean, they probably don't even understand. A lot of times the board may not even understand what they're getting into. I think from working with both boards and superintendents, I think having something that allows for professional discussion about where we're going, and what decisions we're going to make. I mean, if you're not going to, if this person's not going to come back, and for whatever reason, I think it's just better to let them know sooner than later. I think and likewise, you want that from them, that if you, for some reason, just decide that I want to move on to another district, I'd like to know, if I'm a board member, I want to know as soon as I can find out, so that I can plan accordingly and deal with that. So, some have put in, we need to, if you are intending to leave a district, that you notify the board by January 1 that of your intentions. And likewise, if the board is not intending to renew, that they would notify the candidate by January 1 of their intentions to not renew.
Laura just said maybe we can write something simpler.
Yeah, no, just
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
Yeah,
January
by
1.
legal counsel.
Section 2 talks about November 1st, so if if the school board was to start a search, that would give you time to kind of get ramped up. You know, so either way, November 1st, it would then give the superintendent time to start looking.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I would be okay with something like that because, you know, I would feel more comfortable with something where it says that we'll get notified and we'll notify. Just, when you think about, this is
Mutually.
somebody who
Yeah.
might be, maybe they have a family that they're considering, they're gonna need ample notice as well.
Yeah. Give us a chance to work on something, does that make sense? But I think we could take subsection 2 and make it work for both sides of the coin, maybe? And then it's not as awkward as Mike said then with all these dates and paragraphs, yet it provides a little protection for both sides. Bottom line to me is if you get the right person, in 2 years from now, you want to start that conversation July 1 with him or her and say, we're going to start talking about, because you can actually agree to a new contract. Once you get past July 1, you hit July 2, you can start negotiating your next contract and have an agreement ready to roll. It just can't replace what's currently in place.
Right.
And as I listen to my colleagues, at least the ones that are still out there working, I'm retired, but they talk about that process going on. That boards know it's tough to get superintendents right now, and if they've got someone they feel good about and the district feels good, they start that process July 1, they're sitting down with that person right now. And they want that contract worked out by, you know, sometime in July. And they might sit on it for a while, but it's worked out already and ready to go. And you have that luxury of doing that. So, you know, you can do that without putting that language in here. But we'll work on something and shorten it up, make it more concise, give a little bit of notification both ways, and kind of go from there. Because I see head nodding that we should do that, so
Yep,
we'll do that.
thanks.
Okay.
On page 2, I didn't make any changes to letter C, expiration, or D, termination during the term.
I did actually have a question about
Yes.
the termination part. With my fuzzy memory, it seems to me in the past that there have been districts that have paid a superintendent to leave, basically. And things aren't working out, they want to send them on their way, and then it seems like the public's quite outraged with the amount of money that the superintendent is paid to expedite that. So could you talk a little about that and if you feel that this is sufficient?
And maybe as superintendents, you have a little more experience with it. Statute 122A40 is going to specify for cause so that you can terminate. So what I believe would happen is that a board is not satisfied with a superintendent's performance and does not want to continue a relationship and take them through the process of determining just cause and terminating them per the statute. So it is less costly for them to pay out the contract than it is taking them through that process. Is that probably an accurate?
And this refers to the process of cause, right?
Yes.
So if obviously if you've done anything that's inappropriate or illegal, you don't have a financial obligation. You have a financial obligation if you just don't like exactly how they're doing things, and you have a contract with them, like in any other contract. If I have a contract with somebody that I might not like to work, but I have a contract, I might have to pay that out. So you negotiate. That's why you talk about, yes, nobody likes it. That's not a good thing to do, but sometimes the districts have to do that because for whatever reason, they want to do it.
Sometimes what you see is you see a turnover on the board, even like,
Yeah.
right now, we're gonna add 3 new members, so we've added Jackie already, and this superintendent just signed a new contract a year ago, and now there's a different flavor on the board, or a different, feel about how that person truly is performing. And I've seen that happen, where I've seen a colleague of mine sign a new contract, they're barely started into it, and board changed over in the fall, and by spring, they're being bought out of the contract, because the new board members are saying, we don't like Jim Bauk, and we're gonna go in a new direction. And we're gonna take that heat and and exit and go do a new search and bring in someone that we'd like to see in that chair. So I've seen that happen.
Jim, and some of the items on page 4 are the items that add to that payout.
That's exactly what I was just looking at.
Accumulation of sick and vacation adds to that buyout cost.
But certainly you want to be fair to this, to a superintendent as well, you know,
Correct.
if they haven't done anything wrong, it's just the board chose a different direction, you don't want them to be high and dry, and so I
Right, that's gonna
see.
be the biggest payout, when it's just in
Yeah,
that
right.
regard.
Right.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yep.
You're the
Right.
superintendent in that position, you hold out and, you know.
It takes a while to get a job and all those,
Yes.
you're committed and moved and,
Yep.
yeah,
Yep.
so.
So what people might need to understand that what is unique about a superintendent contract is maybe different than the private sector in that the cause is spelled out in statute. Even if we don't like the performance, that's generally not a just
That's
cause,
right.
and people may not understand that. So
That
it's
is correct.
probably helpful for people to understand in the public.
Right.
Anything else on page 2? Didn't change anything on page 3.
I agree with the comment on page 4.
We are now on page 4.
Sorry.
I can start it out because it's been one of my things for years. You know, if we're giving 6 weeks of vacation, 11 paid holidays, 20 sick days is an inordinate amount of sick leave pay. That's been my issue. And then it's the accumulation and the payout. If it was a more reasonable number,
Yeah, I mean, in most private sector contracts, you're limited to how many days you can carry over, and you don't get bought out of them. So that whole buying out your 10 days a year seems not to be what the taxpayers have in any of their contracts. Same thing with the accumulated sick leave. I mean, that's to use when you're sick, so you don't come in and poison 20 other people. You know, and for $1,000 a day, which is what this is going to be valued at, you know, someone may make the choice to come in. So I'd rather see them used, and if they're not used, then you don't get to bank them. I mean, they should be used. This is not something that should be bankable. This is something for your health, not, you know, rewarding you.
So that's a good point to clarify that this is essentially another 20 grand that one is likely to exercise every year if it's unused.
Yep.
When you look at the total value.
Yeah,
of the
if you're looking at total compensation, it's 20 grand.
Which
Well-
is partly why it's highlighted, so it's a opportunity for negotiations.
We also have to consider that other districts do
Correct.
allow it.
yeah.
Correct.
So we need to remain
Yes.
competitive.
That is correct. I was just going to go there. Thank you.
I
I would-
have always said I would rather pay the salary and have it be transparent than have all these provisions. So when you do comp comparisons, you know how tough that gets. Oh, you've got this piece here and that piece there, and, yeah.
So
Do we know what other districts?
It's on the chart that I provided last week.
Or I missed it, okay.
I don't know that it articulated all of the buyout options. The
I
one
think it
thing,
did say some of them.
yeah, some of them did. The one thing that Jim and I discussed was the bridge to long-term disability. So, in all of our contracts, whether they're a teacher or an ESP, they are allowed to accumulate unlimited. What it doesn't do is allows them to sell days back. However, when we thought about the amount that superintendent could accumulate, we wanted to ensure that we had some sort of bridge to that long-term disability if something catastrophic happened. And we have a 60-day waiting period for our long-term disability policy. So we were suggesting possibly 100 days as the cap, thinking about if somebody is sick, not yet diagnosed with something, they could use a few days, medical appointments, doctor's appointments, then have a diagnosis or have a catastrophic medical event happen, and then start into that pattern towards the long-term disability coverage. So it's a little bit of a cushion at 100 days. That's just another option we threw out.
So, yeah, in this one, we're saying up to 20 days of unused, so I can either keep it and bank it, or I can pay it out. the issue becomes 10 years down the road, when the contract is 50% higher due to inflation, that the things they earned 10 years previous
it's always at
is
the
now.
current rate of
Right,
pay.
is now at the current rate, which is, again, they're banking on that. And again, that's not an interest of mine to have them bank that.
I know for a lot of new board members, I don't know that you've had these conversations during negotiations. Every job I've ever had, we have short-term and long-term disability, and you don't have the sick leave. And I'm not sure, how 10, 15, 20 years ago, the sick leave came to be what it is, but I've always expressed if we would cost out the long-term, short-term disability, reduce the number of sick days, and there is no buyout of sick days to offer disability, I think we could reasonably offer disability to the superintendent without having that number of sick days.
From Laurel's chart last time, it looks like the highest anyone really has for buyback is 20 total days, and we have 30 total days, combining the vacation and sick. So it looks like we could cut the 10 days and still be competitive. We could cut 10 of the sick days and still be competitive.
Thank you, Jackie, because I just pulled it out too.
Yeah, thanks.
And that's the most,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, but I
That
would,
would still be,
That's
that would
at the
still
end of
be,
each contract year.
yes.
Okay.
yeah,
But the other districts
I'll have it.
all have.
You also have to look at what they're paying from a
Yeah,
salary
but I don't know
standpoint
that
also,
they
'cause
offer
it's total
disability.
package.
So if the argument is that this is a bridge to disability, I would argue it's probably cheaper to purchase a disability policy than to offer, sick days at the rate of $1,000 a day.
Yep.
My comment was about the accumulation total, not the sellback.
I know,
Okay.
but just, sick days generically.
But you can't use short-term disability if kid A gets sick for 10 days and then you're working for another month. And then kid B gets sick for 12 days and,
Disabilities for the employee. Yeah, so.
But sick
so-
leave is for,
right?
For family, I understand that. Yeah, I understand that.
I'm just saying, or for yourself.
Yeah, no, I
You
know.
happen to have asthma
Trust me,
and
I've
three months
lived
a
this
year.
in my own life, so
Yeah.
I understand sick leave.
So let me just kind of recap some things. One, I think you saw a lot of these kind of buyback features come into superintendent contracts because of the pushback from the public about you're paying those people way too much money. So now, we are now arguing the reverse tonight, saying, well, let's just pay them a lot more money on the salary in the front end and defend that and get rid of this. So, I'm just gonna push you, okay? I'm just gonna push you a little harder. So are you willing to raise the salary then?
I
To
didn't
say
hear
that you
anyone
say
say that.
competitive? Or do you want to do something like this? I mean, I'm not saying one way is right and one way is wrong, okay? I'm just saying that, I know where some of these things came from. That's just because I have gray hair and lack of it. And that's why they came about. Because at one time, our salaries as superintendents were capped to 90% whatever the governor's salary. And Arnie, who helped get that law passed, 2, 3 years later, said this was wrong, we're losing superintendents left and right. And we were in the state of Minnesota at that time. And it wasn't because baby boomers were retiring, it was because people would go to Illinois and double their salary. Or go to Iowa. You can still go to Iowa, folks, and make more money as a superintendent than you can in any contract, except for a handful in this metro area in Minnesota. So, I mean, if I was a young superintendent, I'd be looking to go to Iowa, Nebraska, or Illinois right now in the upper Midwest. That's just me personally speaking. I'm trying to pitch for the superintendent, who you're also going to try to attract here.
Right,
Okay.
and we've got to remember that when we're just focusing on 10 days, 20 days, 30
I know.
days, it is part of the package.
Package.
So you know, we can't just say, yeah, I want to cut this back, because
Yeah.
it could be a negotiating point.
Yeah.
Again, it comes down to someone's financial, but I think what I am hearing is that we don't want this to be just an accumulation, that it should be there as a bridge to long-term disability.
Yep.
And, you know, just like the private sector that everyone else has, short-term disability usually kicks in after some period of time, and then long-term, two different types of things to help get people, you know, when they
Through.
are indeed sick.
Yeah. And maybe what you want to do is reduce the number of days.
Yes, that's
And
what I'd be.
that, and not 20, maybe it's 15. I mean, right there, you're going to start pushing back accumulation. But I also understand Jackie's point too about when, if you're the one who has to care for that child who's sick or whatever, I mean, you want to make sure that they're okay on that end too. I share with Laurel, I can remember a contract I signed when first year I went to Owatonna. It was because of short-term leave, I was worried about that. And they front-loaded so many sick days, but then I didn't earn any that whole period of time either, until that earning amount of whatever it was, 12 or 15 days a year, had caught up with how many days they front-loaded to help me get to long-term disability in case I needed it. So that may be another twist that someone brings to the table when we start, you know, when you start looking at this contract down the road, so.
Laurel, do you have a recommendation for that?
So my recommendation is that for the accrual, that we do, the maximum would be something like 100 days. Anywhere between 80 and 100 days.
Force them to either cash out whatever you're giving to them, or they have to use it for a legitimate purpose.
So if you
So that would be-
think about the contract that was in place a year ago, the limit was 192 and a half days at $1,000 a day. So if that person had accumulated that much sick leave and cashed it out at that, we're
show up on
already
the news
reducing
with
it by almost
$192,000
$100,000 in
payout.
terms of a benefit by having the accumulation limit be 100 or 80 to 100.
So you're not recommending to change the 20 downward at all, even though this would be significantly more than other districts?
That's certainly something we could discuss. We have to look at all of the fringe benefits, and that's why I highlighted it. So if you look at the matching amounts, there might be other districts that have $15,000 in matching, and we have $7,500. And again, last week, we talked about what is the candidate's interest and us attracting them to this contract. Well, they want more, maybe they want money into a health savings account or an HRA, a health retirement account. And so we could put money there instead of into health insurance.
And I think that's where I'd like to get some perspective from Ken as we kind of go, because we're going one by one, right, and kind of touching each one and having a perspective on them. But at the end of the day, we want a pretty well-balanced, competitive set of benefits that are going to appeal to the type of candidate that we're looking for. So it might, you know, we're not necessarily having somebody who's necessarily going to want to be here for 10 or 20 years. Maybe the ideal candidate, someone who wants to be here for 5 years, or what are people at what type of candidate wants what benefits?
I think you don't want to lock in on all your benefits because they come with different situations. If your kids are out of school and are off your insurance program, that's a whole different thing. If you are near retirement and want to build that retirement thing, you want the health savings accounts and a variety of things. So what you want to do is to say, what are we, you know, a lot of the contract comparisons talk about what's your total fringe benefit package. You know, and so if it's 40,000, okay, then how do you want that distributed, you know,
Yeah.
kind of thing. And it will vary. And that's part of that negotiations. You shouldn't argue about salary that much. You know, that's why we try to set that as but individual situations are different.
We have to make a decision.
I would recommend keeping the highlights that I have
Okay.
and changing the maximum accumulation to something other than 192.5.
Okay.
So you said capping it between 80 and 100? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I'd be fine in keeping it at that level.
Anya, Kelsey?
I personally would like to see the 20 brought down, but I think it's,
You
again, it
could
comes
bring
back to the
20 down
total.
15. Let it accumulate 15 days a year versus 20. That's
At least as a
little-
starting point.
Yeah.
Right, I don't want to be at the max end of that type of a benefit right out of the gates.
Yeah.
I think it would really depend on the candidate. I mean, if our candidate has a bunch of kids, then they're probably gonna want this.
We can move it up.
But, you know, like, so I think that's something that we should remain open and flexible.
Yeah, and what you could do is we could, for example, you authorize your chair and vice chair to go negotiate this. You could say,
Yeah.
20 days would be the max in this one, but if we could, let's start at 15 or whatever, and then see where the candidate would like to go with this particular benefit. 'Cause I think if you provide those kinds of ranges and flexibility, you're more likely to land some spot where it's gonna go.
Yeah.
So,
And that was
Yeah.
one of the things that Jim and I talked about was costing out each of these benefits. So if you're talking about full family medical at the high plan, what does that cost versus somebody who's single and only needs single and then wants money into an HRA instead?
Right.
And being able to have that flexibility to move that around.
Yeah.
I do think also Jim brought up a really important point, which is the optics and the political element of what a base salary versus other benefits combine to create. And so I do just want to recognize that reality of not all candidates will want to look like they're necessarily getting paid this huge base salary, and that there are optics that the other components play that are beneficial.
yep. Okay.
All right, on page 5 at the top, that comment is actually for me to confirm with payroll that it's not a constructive receipt problem to have it paid out in 2 lump sums. I believe that it has to do with IRS limit, but there's not a reference to IRS limit in there, so that's something for me to check out. In terms of the personal leave, when you look at MSBA, they have either personal leave or emergency leave, but not both, and we have both.
Did they provide rationale for that?
They just basically said in their handbook, you don't need both of them. And I would submit to you with 30 days of vacation, I think that is more than adequately covered.
And it even says, request for personal leave must be 3 days in advance, except in the event of an emergency.
Yeah.
So
it's just-
it's an emergency leave, so.
This is
I would
really
guess-
for those situations where something really sudden
Yeah.
comes up.
But the difference here is the people deciding,
Correct.
so we definitely want to clarify who's going to be the decision maker on this.
If you go with the emergency, it's at the discretion of the school board, and that's what we're suggesting to you.
Okay.
See, I'll give you an example. Emergency leave happened in Shakopee, for example, with a superintendent who got ill with cancer. Things happen, and because it says it's the discretion of the board, you still have control over it. But we've worked with many districts where things happen to superintendents and car crash, and all of a sudden you're in a hospital for a long period of time, and boards decide to do what they think is right, and make that decision. You have that discretion. So,
I'm going to guess, and I could be wrong on this, and I can't remember what you and I talked about it today, Laurel. I'm going to guess this is a carryover from Kate's administrative contract that she put into this contract as a benefit she didn't want to lose. In other words, when she transitioned to the superintendent, she brought this language because directors and principals have personal leave days. And so I'm guessing she trailed that right into her initial contract, and it was just left there. My own personal experience, I can't remember a contract that had personal leave in for me as a superintendent. Either I had vacation or it went to the board, I got an emergency leave, and that's the way it was dealt with. I'm recommending you remove it.
I was going to say,
So remove personal, keep
and it's
emergency
possible
language.
some of that sick leave language also carried over.
Oh, I'm sure it
That
did
is.
too.
And-
I'm
and
sure it did
so-
too.
And so within other superintendents' contracts, if they did not come out of one of those other bargaining groups, they probably wouldn't have had that language.
Okay, but you know what? I'm going to walk through those right now. David Law came from a different district, so when he went to Anoka Hennepin, he got it in his contract. Egan Rosemount, Apple Valley doesn't have it, and she's an internal person, was the director of special ed. I'm just thinking out loud as you make that statement. South Washington, Keith came from here, going to South Washington. Rochester, I don't know about, Mike doesn't have it. Elk River, Dan came to Elk River just a year ago. So it appears, just by going through those, Robbinsdale, he came from outside the district. Chase came from outside the district. St. Paul, Joe came from outside the district. And so did Minneapolis. It appears that they've left it in, is what I'm saying, versus having it carry with them, Dean. At least for our benchmark districts. Could be different in someplace else.
Well, the superintendent's contracts, they're public information.
Correct.
So they tend to look.
They look to see
Yeah.
what else other people are getting. You're right.
Right.
Exactly.
I'd be fine cutting out E.
Agreed.
Yep.
Are we okay with that, or is there a difference of opinion? All right.
On page 6, I've just highlighted the health and hospitalization as another.
Added language on bereavement.
Thank you. Letter G, bereavement leave. The previous contract said the superintendent shall be granted bereavement leave for a death within the superintendent's immediate or close family. And when I read it, I didn't know what the definition of close family was. And then I looked at MSBA, and they actually define immediate family. So I went back to all of our other contracts, and we have a definition of immediate family, and so I copied that into this contract.
What is the definition?
It's right
It's
here.
right
Immediate
past that.
family will
Sorry.
include parent, sister, brother, spouse, son, daughter, son-in-law, and any other relative or non-relative who stands in the same relationship with the employee.
Okay. So like if any other relative or non-relative who stands in as one of these, like somebody who you think of as a child, maybe you raised them, but it's your niece or something.
We're okay
Good
with
with that?
that?
Thank you.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
That's reasonable.
All right, under insurance, letter A, it's just highlighted because that is, again, an item that is part of the full fringe benefit, and depending on the nuance of the candidate and their interests, could be full family or it could be single, and we have some flexibility with that.
But they're paying nothing into it, unlike every other employee.
That's not unlike every other
No,
employee. It's
I mean-
like many of our employees who are on the lowest cost, high deductible plan.
Okay, all right. But this isn't necessarily defined as the lowest cost
It
high
is
deductible
not
one.
necessarily.
Okay. So for apples to apples, where we would have many employees paying, we wouldn't have the superintendent paying.
Well, no, if employees elected the high deductible health plan, basically the district is covering 100% of the cost of the premium.
What I'm saying is, if we have one that the employees are paying at a premium for, or part of it, a couple $100 a month, or whatever that number is. So you take that same one and you put it over here on the superintendent's
Oh,
contract.
yeah.
We're saying they're not paying a dime in any instance.
I got you, I got to the
Yes.
last half of the sentence.
Which
Yeah,
seems
so
to be
whichever one
about
they
par.
select, we're paying 100%.
Say again, Jackie?
That seems to be about par for the other districts.
Correct. They're going to pay the full cost.
Mm-hmm.
per family.
Yeah.
It's part of the
It seems to be a
package.
benefit that superintendents,
Yeah, I
Expect
haven't seen that
to have.
language change.
I mean, if you wanted to, you could put a dollar amount in there with a percent escalator or something like that.
I'm just saying, we're taking a bargaining chip off the table
Yeah.
from day one.
Yeah,
As
Yeah.
we just talked, there are many different levers to
Yeah.
pull. We've just shut that one down
Yeah.
without considering it as a lever to flex.
that may be a very important, depends on their situation.
Right.
And they may be able to give you up other things, you know, if they have that. Yeah, I'd leave it as a bargaining chip. Yeah.
Okay, anything else?
So in the end, I know I won't be negotiating this piece. As Laura said, you may want to cost the whole entire thing. So as this thing sits today, cost that whole thing out to see, you know, here's the salary, here's the vacation, here's the sick days, here's the health insurance, here's this piece. Now you can see what the total thing is. Kind of like we do when we talk to the bargaining groups, you know, here's the parameters where you want to put the money within that bucket. Maybe
And-
the
and-
bucket's too big, or maybe it's too small, maybe it's just right, but at least you'll know. I mean, if somebody asked me today, I couldn't tell you what the total cost of this is as it's written.
Yeah.
I can tell you the salary and I can ballpark the others, but I couldn't tell you specifically.
And what Laurel and I talked about today was, once we got through tonight, we would take the time to do that guesstimate, because there's, some of them aren't as solid numbers. But we would pull that together so that when you go into that negotiation phase and they say, well, I'll take single health and dental, but I want the dollar value of that moved over to an HRA account, blah, 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 instead. Then you know what kind of dollars you're dealing with, exactly to your point, Dean.
Yep.
And what kind of flexibility has the board empowered the board chair and vice chair? What are those parameters you've been given to negotiate within? So,
And I guess in that same vein, when you start looking at things like that, I just buzzed through the rest of the contract. I didn't see any mention of transportation or car. This is a person you're expecting as a normal course of business to be going to
I thought,
so many different buildings.
I thought that I saw that on that sheet, though.
So
Yes,
MSBA
yes.
recommends either a car allotment per month or using IRS mileage. And we have in the past used the mileage, and so we don't have a car allotment within the contract.
Sure.
So others have
yeah,
done it the
others
other way.
do, looking
But they
at
do
that
get
sheet. Rosemount does mileage.
Reimbursement and-
South Washington does 500 a month for car. Rochester, they do mileage after, he gets 100 a month, and then they do mileage after that. Elk River is like us, just reimbursed. Robbinsdale's $650 a month. Wayzata is $800 a month. North St. Paul is $600. St. Paul is $600. And then Minneapolis is $400 a month. If they do take a car allowance, what happens on their payroll check is, it's listed as a salary. It's not TRA, so there's no cost to the district for TRA, but the person has to pay Fed and state taxes on it, so.
And
then-
sorry, would we be able to calculate based on like the last 5 years what that was worth? on the mileage
I
side?
suppose we could draw Kate's,
Absolutely.
we could draw.
Yeah, how many miles a
Kate's-
day? I mean, that's
don't
1,000
know.
mile, or that's
Like, how much
10,000
did
miles
we
a year.
pay out?
At
Yeah.
55 cents is 550, and we've said 400 to 600, or
Yeah.
400 to 700.
Be-
So use 10,000 miles a year, and if you're driving 50 miles a day amongst different sites, 250 a week, 30 weeks a year,
And even if we had that information in the past, what have we paid out on mileage?
Pull that.
We'd also need to consider that as a new superintendent, they'd be more likely to travel more as they're
They
getting
probably
established
will,
and
or they
visiting more
should.
buildings.
Yeah.
Yeah, we would want them to. So we would have to consider.
I
that
hope they
also.
do. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yep.
Well, that's where, it's also, if you do mileage and reimbursement, then they've got to keep track of it, and it's wasting their time. Honestly, just leasing them a car and giving them a gas card, maybe that's just,
No, can't do that, but.
can't do that.
No, yeah.
But you
I
can
think
do
it's
a
lease.
flat dollar
Those
amount.
dollars per month are dollars per month. It's not a lease. It's, you buy your own car, you maintain
Yeah,
it
that's
yourself.
right.
Yeah.
A lot of districts do the dollars per month because they don't want to deal with the day-to-day paying a reimbursement for mileage. They just say, here's your $500.
You're taxed on it, and it's your problem.
And
You
if
figure
you,
it out.
if you you go to IRS, you worry with, you can go against that 500 with IRS, but it's not your issue.
You
It's the
got to
school's
keep your records, yeah.
Yeah,
You just gotta keep
they
it.
have to keep track of their mileage and then do it through the tax method, but what we could do is probably pull last 5 years of what did Kate do and kind of get a dollar amount on a monthly basis and then bring that back to you and see if that makes sense or not.
And those numbers either way sound like they would be equalized with taxation and everything else.
So going back to page 6, we got a little bit off topic, but letter B is something that I believe was carried into this contract from Kate's previous contracts that has been sunset in all of our other management contracts. So I'm recommending we delete this whole entire section.
Yep.
Yep, absolutely.
It's a significant cost that we would be,
No complaint from me.
I didn't think
Yeah.
so.
And are we under state law to offer COBRA anyway?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, then we don't even have to put that in there. Okay.
Yep.
We just don't have to pay for COBRA.
Right, exactly.
On page 7, the 2 places that I've highlighted are, again, negotiations items to consider. Life insurance, Jim and I spoke, if somebody has a young family and wants more than 3 times annual salary, that might be an area that's very, very cost-effective.
It's very cheap.
It's very cheap.
Some-
And anytime there's a benefit over $50,000, it's taxed to the employee. So Jim had a...
Social Security and Medicaid,
So
or Medicare taxes.
Jim had a contract that increased the life insurance and had a provision that the school board would pay for that liability, that additional cost.
You don't have to do
It's
that.
still very small.
Yeah.
It's a cheap benefit.
Why isn't there a short-term disability?
We do not have short-term disability for any of our employees. It's very administratively cumbersome.
So what do people do when they're on maternity?
Sick days.
They do sick days, and then our teachers have a sub-pool to get them to short-term disability. Other contracts do not. And one of the benefits that somebody might ask for is money to buy their own short-term disability or long-term disability policy. So they might want to negotiate an extra X number of dollars into an HRA or HSA, for example, that they could use to then buy a policy to cover them. Didn't make any changes or recommendations on page 8. Page 9, base salary, as we talked about last week, starting at $225,000.
And the language is written in a way that doesn't preclude you, whoever is the board going forward in the second year of the contract, if you wanted to raise their base pay, you could. But it doesn't force you by having to list a second year base pay in there. And then we wrote it, oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
I mean,
You're on a roll.
no, I'm stopping.
So what we said was the base pay for this contract is $225,000.
Right.
That's if you decided all 3 years would be $225,000. As Jim mentioned, you could use that as you wanted to. Letter C, the performance incentive, as we talked about last week, would not start until the beginning of year 2 to be paid at the end of year 2 based on performance up to 10%.
Can I make one comment on base salary?
Please.
Most of the contracts we're writing now, practically all of them, have a 3-year salary in the contract.
Index them in there? or
Indexed.
Listed?
Indexed in. And the reason they do it, boards want to do it, there's nothing worse than arguing at a board meeting over what you ought to pay the superintendent every year. Because whatever you do with the superintendent, every other group watches that. So if you give them 2,000, so the board is always feels pressure to keep it as low as possible and not reward the person, and creates bad feelings. So boards now typically will say, we'll pay, let's say, $225,000 first year, $228,000 next year, $231,000 next year, and it's 3-year and it's done. You don't have to have any discussion publicly about board salary other than what you do in your performance process. And so we rarely, I don't know of anyone that we've done in the last few years anyway, that has had a same salary all the way through.
But you'd still have the performance
Yes.
discussion.
Yeah, right, yeah. Oh, yes, you still have performance discussion. But in terms of arguing about, do we give them, $500 or $1,000, people come to the board and argue with you, and it becomes just non-productive. And for superintendents, they just don't want to deal with that. They don't need that kind of discussion, other than performance.
So it doesn't have to be huge, it could be
No,
somewhat
no,
minimal, but it's
no,
still a
just-
number that
yeah,
we're not arguing over.
Right, that's right,
And
exactly right.
We
Doesn't have to
argue
be
over the
huge,
incentive,
no.
we're gonna argue it over
Yeah.
it anyway.
If you think, if you say, all right, it's a 0.5% or 2%, I don't know, whatever you want to do, but,
What
or even
about-
start lower.
And correct me if I'm wrong here, but in the past, we've had superintendents turn down, for political reasons, turn down the incentives. If you're locked into that in the contract and it's specifically spelled out, are you, and they,
Obligated.
They can always turn it down.
okay.
I mean, I think that's become more of an archaic thing, and the reason I say that is, if you do the salary that's sort of reasonable to everybody, you don't have to turn it down. It's like teachers don't turn down a reasonable contract or custodians or anybody else. So if it becomes, you put in there $10,000 raise, yeah, becomes problematic.
And you would have some guidance on what that kind of percentage has typically been in
Well,
contracts, or we can look up
Yeah,
some
each district
comparison?
looks at what's the normal, what are you targeting, 1.5%, let's say? I don't know what you're
Yeah,
targeting.
roll-up costs what, 2.5%?
Whatever you
on-
are typically targeting
generic
for your
contract.
groups,
Yeah.
make it reasonable, but not excessive, so you don't.
Yeah,
And
so
you
I
re-
wouldn't necessarily go with our roll-up costs, because a percentage amount is what other contract groups are going to assume is going to happen to their base
That's right.
salary.
So you gotta make it realistic.
Right. So if our roll-up costs are 2.5%, that's not what we would say would be the increase to the base, because then everybody would assume roll-up costs and 2.5% to the base, because the superintendent had a 2.5% increase to the base. So I would start lower.
Now, if you look at a point a year, I mean, that's a little over $2,000. I mean, just call it $2,000 and probably does two things. One, it shows that there is some increase, but the main piece is the 10%, up to 10% on incentive, and it
Eliminates
locks
the
in, it
conversation.
eliminates the conversation. Conversation's gonna
Well,
be
you've,
had.
you've
It's gonna be had
pre-had
by
the
different-
conversation, yeah.
Yeah.
So it sounds like people are saying, yeah, add something in, but the details will come back to us, what you recommend.
And I like Mike's idea of a flat dollar amount versus a percentage.
Yep.
So,
I agree.
They'll figure out the percentage.
I-
They'll do the math.
Like .9.
So if it's 0.9, great, you're in good shape.
it's good, they're doing math, that's right.
They don't want that 0.9, no. They won't bring it up.
Any conversation about the performance incentive letter C and the way that's written?
Just more as a commentary for the board, so if you do, I mean, the school year's gonna start in September, you're gonna do the evaluation in December, so if you're intending to follow through with, bullet C there, you gotta start early in the year.
Well, no.
There were times where,
This is for,
December is goal setting, and then you have the evaluation at the end of the school year. So that's how we did it previously.
yeah,
is
but,
we would
yeah.
set goals for
uh,
the superintendent.
Yeah,
And then,
I'm just saying the goal has to be set early enough so they've got the school year to work on it.
true.
There were years we didn't get the goal set
Done
early
early
enough,
enough.
and you'd be into December, January, and trying to set goals, and so C didn't necessarily always happen just because we didn't get it going early enough.
See, to me, you should be, oh, go ahead. You sure? Just want to make sure.
Later I'll interrupt them.
It seems to me, when have you done your evaluation of the superintendent, time-wise? Has it been in June, May, or has it been in December?
The evaluation
Well,
should
there's a
have,
mid-year.
By the board.
In December.
You did it in December and then a final in the spring, or?
We
Yeah,
did like
May, June.
July, August, didn't we? And then
Yeah.
one in December.
Can't remember.
Yeah.
December was the halfway
So like a
point.
mid-year check-in
Yeah.
in December.
I always understood that we were setting goals, and that Kate would have to do specific things in order, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah,
but
so
that-
there were always goals that we set, for that school year.
But-
And a lot of times they could align with C, it's just,
I thought that-
there may be, let's say there's 5 goals you're gonna work on, but maybe for the performance incentive, maybe there's 3 or 6. All I wanted to note is just, you gotta start it way earlier than,
Agreed.
there's times I was on the board where
Yes.
we didn't get it started early enough.
Yes. And I think that also helps to solidify the fact that we are not doing a performance incentive at the end of year 1. They start year 2 under the performance incentive, so they've had a whole year goal-setting
Demonstrate, yeah.
acclimation,
Yeah, that makes
performance
sense.
evaluation, and then we start into performance based on their performance in year 2 and year 1 cumulatively, so.
If you're going to make this work, in my opinion, you want to do that final evaluation sometime in June. And in that evaluation, you are also now talking about goals for the next school year.
Absolutely.
And then after that, at least in my experience, the board chair and I would sit down, formalize those goals, bring them back to the board, make sure the board agreed. Much like Dean said, my performance plan had, you know, maybe 3 or 4 things under the key results the district was looking for. It also had another bucket of, you know, I call it on the radar or whatever, things that the board wanted me to keep monitoring, watching out for, but it wasn't a specific goal. And so there was always a couple components to that performance plan going forward. Much too much work, but the goals became the focal point for any kind of incentive pay. Plus, what happened that school year? There is stuff that happens during the school year that'll take your superintendent off course for days at a time. And we're a large enough district where that is gonna happen. And so when boards would review mine, they'd say, okay, you got this and this and this done with these goals, but you didn't get this far. And the ones I've worked with even had a weighting system a little bit. How much do they want to put on the goals? How much do they just want to put on just annual kind of performance stuff that you do? And then they talk about the stuff bucket. You know, what happened this year that took Jim off course, and yet it was good work for our, you know, for our school district. And then we talk about that in evaluation, and then going forward from that evaluation would be a decision on performance pay and an outline in those 2 areas, not the one that, you know, something just happened this school year, of what do we want Jim to work on going forward. And by August, we had that finalized, okay, and ready to roll for the whole school year, so that when you would do your December mid-year check-in, you've got 3 or 4 months of progress already. I mean, I'll be doing the check-ins with the directors and assistant soups in January. Where are you at? What are you doing? I've been doing it already with them in my meetings in October, November, just because I didn't know some of the stuff they were working on. And then you can come in June and do that final piece, and then decide your performance pay, if any, is to be granted. You just have to stay on it like clockwork and not give it up. And
We
you
have
do.
to overhaul what we're doing, I
Yeah.
think, as a board. We've discussed this in the past.
Yeah, I've only been through one of them, you know, because of the situation over the last year and a half. We only had one.
Well, they wouldn't have done you any, yeah,
Yeah.
my last year, they didn't do an evaluation either, and I didn't, you
Yeah.
know, so, I get that,
Yeah.
so.
We need to discuss that.
On page 10, the only thing I want to highlight is letter D. MSBA suggests a medical examination once every blank years. It says once every year, and Jim and I have talked about it, and I'm not sure if the board is interested in that. It has been in the contract in the past, and it's been a requirement every year.
I mean, most of our full ride medical insurance programs all have an annual physical put in there, so it's not costing us anything.
This is more than a physical though, isn't it?
It's a signed document by medical personnel that validates that you are certified to perform your duties. So I don't know how detailed that would be.
So just from very bizarre fluke things that I know have happened to people, I am 100% in favor of this, because I know several people who have found life-threatening critical things in these examinations that saved their life, and they now live long, happy lives, whereas they could have just real quick. So that's why I would be in support of something like that, because I just care about people. But, you know, because if you're healthy, you might not be going to the doctor every year for a physical, or if you think you're healthy.
I think part of it is the summary document that's provided to the school board is a little.
Yeah, that's the part where, like, you know, like, I don't know if we, like, need a whole explanation, but.
It doesn't
All you
violate
get
any
is a
of the
couple,
rules.
3 sentences.
Is that, if it's,
I
if
can
only
tell
just,
you,
if it's
all
only
you
just
get
a
is a
little bit,
couple, 3 sentences that Dean is able to perform, you know,
Yeah.
da-da-da-da.
But if it's understood in a
There's nothing
contract,
personal.
you're agreeing
Yeah.
to it.
You're agreeing to it then.
Right. And it wouldn't if there was something wrong, it would just say is not
Correct.
physically able.
Correct.
It wouldn't tell us what their problem was.
I would guess
Right.
it's because they're a key employee, a very key employee, not that others aren't, but,
Right.
you know, this is like our CEO, you'd
Yeah,
want to know if they're
Right.
fit for duty or not.
Absolutely. It's a long process to change, so.
Just wanted to get your input.
Yeah.
Do other people have this clause? Certifying their fitness for duty?
Not in District 279 contracts. We can request in HR a certification for fitness for duty, and then we pay for it as a district. So if we have concerns about somebody being able to perform their job, we can request it of an employee. But we don't have it written as a contract and a must-do it once a year.
I
Just
bet this
seems
is
odd, just like
MSBA.
the job description that says how much you're supposed to be able to lift.
I bet it's MSBA language. It seems very,
They do have it in MSBA, however, it doesn't specify that it has to be once a year.
Probably have that
Well,
provision.
yeah, I would agree. I'm assuming mental fitness would be included. in that.
Yeah, well, yeah, overall fitness, yeah.
Go ahead, Jackie, you were going to say something?
But it says a medical examination, not a psych evaluation.
No.
What would stop the board from, if we had a superintendent and we had a concern about their ability to do it, and we think that it might be medical, since you can do that with employees, could the board do that with a superintendent without it having to be in here?
Yes, but it wouldn't necessitate somebody doing it on an annual basis. It would be at the discretion of the board, and you'd have to have reason, justifiable reason, why you believe that they need a medical certification to do their job.
Sure.
Right now, it's requiring it that it happens in order to certify that. Someone asked, have you seen this in I had it when I worked in Buffalo, Minnesota, but I didn't have it in Eastern Carver. So, it varies.
I did not have it all the years.
Yeah, I know in the Buffalo School District at the time, they put it in, I think Darrell Miller was the suit at the time, and they really, at that time, it wasn't your normal kind of physical, I mean, it was, you got on the treadmill, you did this, you did that. It was a full day kind of examination. And that board felt committed to doing that, and it was just kind of part of their culture. But I can't say that this is in every district's contract that you see, so.
So in the-
Oh, I'm sorry, just questioning, I've never seen a
Board
medical.
chair.
Oh, okay, that helps.
A number of
I've never-
superintendents who had this in their contracts ended up going down to Mayo to
Yeah.
their executive, whatever they call it, evaluation plan and on a regular basis. In reality, I would have loved to have that, cost a lot of money. You know? But,
Yeah.
I mean, it would have been, it would have, as a person working in the job, I thought,
Yes.
good, they thought enough about me that I ought to go down and go through this and make sure that I'm physically healthy to do the job. But that was rare.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, what's the limit on this? I mean, what is this? Is it a day-long thing?
Well, yeah, I mean.
Locally, is it the Mayo, what exactly
Yeah,
is
what does
this?
comprehensive mean?
Yeah, right, it gets really, so if they, for example, if they.
What have we done in the last
Let's say that the
9 years?
superintendent goes down to Mayo and goes through the whole thing, and you've got additional costs of $5,000. Right, as it's stated there, it says the district pays
Surrender, yeah.
that amount, that difference. So I think that's why a lot of school boards just eliminate it.
I believe that in the past practice has been, you go in for your annual physical.
Okay.
Not into a particular executive physical or down to Mayo for specialty
Okay.
testing.
Any costs are the
Well, if it's
district's
your-
responsible, so.
Additional, like what she's saying is if it's your annual physical, it's covered under your health
Right,
insurance
yep.
benefits?
Yeah, not
Yeah.
covered
So
by
it
the
wouldn't cost us
insurance.
This is
anything
just
besides
encouraging
mileage.
strongly someone to get their annual physical.
Right.
It's requiring them.
Yeah.
It's not strongly encouraging.
Yeah,
It's
well,
requiring.
yeah.
Yeah, it's required,
Yeah.
by how it's written.
As long as it's not, the Mayo full treatment and everything, that doesn't seem unreasonable, because we're paying for it anyway.
Can I ask a question? Jim and Ken, if you were a candidate and you saw this in the contract, would that be like, big deal? Or would it be like, that's kind of odd? Or, or, I'm just wondering if we're gonna have this in a contract that we're handing, or negotiating with people. I think I might feel like, wow, that's a little invasive. I'm just wondering what that might do to.
I think someone would ask, why is this in here? Was there a situation previously that the board had someone that was ill and
Can I
didn't do
throw
it?
something
and,
out? Yeah,
you know,
I'm gonna
that's how
just
you kind of think.
go out on a flyer here. It could potentially be related to 3 times salary on life insurance. You start getting up into the higher dollar value life insurance policies, there's medical underwriting that, it's not possibly, I don't know.
Usually at corporate,
Because
when
it's
you're
3
over
times
one-time
salary.
salary, they start asking for it.
Yeah, well, this
it-
is gonna be 775,000, so that's, so
675.
so it could be a medical underwriting piece, but I'm just guessing.
So,
On
but
that
that's in
underwriting,
the
don't they just do
medical
that
thing, but
once?
not in their employment
They don't
contract.
come
They do
back
that
to it.
once,
They do
right.
it once under underwriting, and then they're done.
Yeah,
They're done after that.
And we have the same language in other management contracts, 2 times annual salary, and we don't require any kind of medical, physical.
To answer your question, Jackie, Ken's been coughing a lot tonight. He probably won't.
I'm gonna go down there.
Search firm contract.
I got the Minnesota crud.
Yeah.
we had all sorts of kids in the building today, so all those
All those germs
they're
are
just
floating around still. It wouldn't prevent me from coming if I saw the language. And when I went to Buffalo, we actually ended up removing the language from the executive contracts because the cost got too much for the full-day exam and either running them through Park Center or Park Nicollet or whatever, or down to Mayo. And so I don't know. I'm kind of ambivalent about it. I understand what you're saying, though. When you first read it, it's like, ooh, they want to know every part about me, you know, or something. I mean, you do feel, you can kind of get a little queasy feeling about it, but it wouldn't prevent me from signing something if the board decides that you really want this left in here. So,
I would be in favor of keeping it in, but leaving it on the table for negotiation.
okay.
Yeah, we can decide that.
Maybe you remove the word comprehensive medical
Yeah.
exam, and just do medical.
Annual.
Yeah.
Annual medical exam. That might help a little bit too. Then you get a little bit at this, well, we're not gonna send you to the U of M for a, 48-hour exam or something like that.
Or something in between. You know, I know that they have, like, if you're gonna be operating heavy machinery, there's an exam that's not quite an annual physical, but it's not comprehensive, like, all day. It's like a 1-hour thing or something, but they do the heart thing, so they know
stress
that.
test, maybe.
Yeah, so that they know that you're gonna, you know, if you're driving.
Is there any stress in this job?
Right, that's what I'm saying. You know, heart conditions or something.
He's
but-
tested every day.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point.
But you know,
And I have copies of our contracts from our other comprehensive, and I can go through and see what their language is as well,
sure.
so, just to make sure.
Okay.
All right.
That was it, unless there are other questions. Is there anything that you've been thinking about that's not represented?
Well, when I was mentioning the car thing, the other thing is that you always expect, I would imagine, a superintendent to be on the other end of a cell phone if you have an emergency and call. And I know maybe that's, people don't pay for that anymore, or just people assume that your cell phone is where you're gonna be called on business as well. What's the interpretation here?
Right now, our district practice is that we give X amount of dollars on a monthly basis for those who have to have cell phones, including the superintendent. I know in MSBA's handbook, they just say, if you do that, make sure that you're following all the tax codes, which we are. And I know it could be debatable, given our size of district, if we went out and bought our own plan.
Right.
And then you distributed cell phones. Right now, the way it stands is we do it's $60 or $90 a month, or whatever it is. I think that's right, though,
It's
isn't it?
45 for
30,
a
60,
flip
90.
phone,
45, okay.
and then 90 for a smartphone.
Which more than covers the cost. It covers someone's
Should.
entire phone.
Yeah.
And then some, if
Yeah.
you get a cheap.
So that's just something we need to review in the budget process, but MSBA didn't say, don't do that, and do this instead. And so I think as we go into negotiations with all our administrative groups in the next year or so, it's something we need to talk about and decide, you know, given that our volume, you know, is it this pathway or that pathway? There's issues with that, and then maintaining the phones and all of that too, so
We
anyway,
can save about 20%, and it's a security issue,
yeah.
Yeah.
so.
But just to be clear, the language that covers that is in maybe a policy handbook?
We have an
instead of-
administrative
It's
manual.
an administrative
Yeah,
manual,
it's
So
not-
it's
it's
covered.
not in the contract?
No.
Doesn't need to be in
Yep.
Right.
So we're not guaranteeing it. Yep.
What we would like to do is redraft this with some of your suggestions and also have our district council, Tim Palmetier, review it. I know that our district council did not write this. We had Steve Knudsen do this. However, we would like our eyes on a draft copy before we give it to Ken to show people and make sure we're on the right page with that.
Okay.
Sounds good.
And then I think as a board, you can determine when we get into February, having Steve be involved in that process or not. I feel pretty comfortable, once Tim Palmetier looks at it, that will be legally fine.
Yeah.
And then it might be just having Steve read it when you've negotiated all the parameters to make sure that we haven't stepped across the line. But I think I shared with,
I think it was using Steve to actually do some of the direct negotiations, so.
yeah, and
we're not-
we're not using them to do that, and I still think Tim can do it for you internally, to be honest, and it would save some money, and I think, and time. Because we want, again, if we consummate a deal and end of February, we want to bring it to the board, have it acted on, have it done.
Great, thank you for all the work. Ken, thank you for personally being involved in the process. Appreciate that very much. Thank you for all the work.
And then one last thing before we quit,
So.
some good news.
Some very good news for.
Well, two good newses. Let me share one first.
Right.
Thank you.
He's the boss, so. Performance
Thank you.
evaluation, please note that.
Yeah, okay. Ken and I talked about fees, and normally for this, I'll speak on his behalf, since he's been having trouble speaking tonight. Normally for a district this size, they would charge a minimum of $22,000 to do the search, but remember, our front-end piece is not being done. And so they would reduce that 25 or 30%. He reduced it 30% plus about another $700. So we've agreed to a $15,000 would be really great. $15,000 fee for this search. And then the really good news, Laurel will share with
Yes,
you.
thank you. So we contacted Ray and Associates and asked for their final invoice because we knew we had not paid the last half of their bill. And we received an email back from Ray and Associates that they are waiving any costs. So we are paid in full, and we did not pay the last final invoice of $11,000.
That is
Wow,
fantastic.
that's incredible.
Thank you.
Good.
Thank you to them as
Yes,
well.
thank you.
Good.
And with that, Mr. Chair, I'll turn the floor back to you.
All right. I don't see any other questions. No one's burning to get out. So with that, we're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.